I think what you're going to hear on Tuesday is that it takes experts to analyze, number one, what the effects of the Affordable Care Act are going to be, not only on the public sector, but residents of the United States, citizens of the United States. But again, this is a presentation to the City Council. The City of Prescott is a public employer. There are certain requirements about implementation and so forth. There will be an expert who is here Tuesday to explain what it means for the city financially, what it means to the city in terms of personnel management, how, and namely, how we manage temporary employees and so forth, and part-time employees, and what implications that has financially for the city. I think it goes without saying, and in fact, if you followed this particular story, in the media, it's having and will have a dramatic impact on public and private employers. It is believed that it will dramatically affect, let's say, the temporary and part-time employment. There are indications of hourly limitations to avoid having to provide coverage like this. I'm reading about those in the media I look at. There are substantial fines. There are substantial fines for employers, not just for one instance of a violation, but the fine, we're going to hear that the fines, that if you have a violation for one employee and you have 500 employees, the fine is 500 times the unit amount of the fine. It's not just one, it's the total employee population basically is the multiplier for fines. We're talking about substantial federal sanctions here that the city and other municipalities and public employers are looking at. And I think that, everyone can have their own opinion on this, but for a city, this city, which has, the financial structure that we keep talking about, we simply cannot afford to have runaway health care costs. We cannot afford that, which means that we need to very carefully understand what this legislation is, its application, what the implications are, and then manage the interface of that legislation and our city employees.
So the restrictions are on part-time and temporary, is it?
Effectively, it's about thresholds being met. If you meet a threshold, you have to provide insurance.
And if you don't, you get fined, is that?
Well, effectively, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So if you had an employee in previous years, and we have a lot of temporary employees in the summertime. We have scorekeepers. We have seasonal employees for Parks and Rec, a lot of seasonal employees for Parks and Rec. And now, it could be as dramatic as having to employ, 30 or 50% or 70% more individuals, just so that the thresholds are not triggered for seasonal employees, for those types of employees we're talking about here. Even though they may be scorekeeping for Parks and Rec softball games, if their hours go over a particular threshold, we have to provide health insurance.
Do you know what it is, what the threshold is?
We're going to hear that on Tuesday, how it relates to the city. And, again, each of us can have our own views, our own philosophies and so forth, but the law is the law. We have to implement the law. It's going to be dramatic, it can be potentially expensive, so we have to be totally up to speed on what this law is, what the meaning and application of it is, because we do have a financial management obligation.
So the Granite Mountain Hot Shots, whether, I'm not even asking about whether they'll be, brought back in the same status they were, but you are still gonna be having fuels crews, right, to help clear away, fuels. And aren't those usually temporary or seasonal employees?
They have been traditionally. And
So,
so it is employees in classes like that we're gonna need to learn more about and will learn more about in the presentation of Tuesday about what options, if any, the city has for temporary employees.
so this may change the city's whole philosophy regarding temporary and seasonal employees.
Absolutely. And, the federal legislation is, of course, very complex, obviously, of national application, but is so reminiscent of legislation we get at the state level as well, that there are these bills passed, these laws enacted, and then it becomes a matter of trying to figure out how they're to be implemented, and in large part, that implementation is not specified in the legislation. The legislation says, here's what you have to do. It doesn't say how to do it. It doesn't say what it means. It doesn't identify the fiscal impact. It doesn't identify the operational impact. And that's the problem here.
And does it seem like sometimes they don't even care about the operational impact or the fiscal impact when
Well, yeah, that's the heavy lifting here, and it just, there are always questions, always considerations which just don't seem to be analyzed. There was a burning question for quite a while about the applicability of this legislation to volunteers, the Over the Hill Gang, the Friends of the Library. All these legions of volunteers that we have in a community like Prescott, great people helping out the community, and a legitimate question about whether the city of Prescott, as a consequence of this legislation, is going to be required to either, number one, tell volunteers, we can't let you volunteer anymore because according to federal law, we're going to have to provide health insurance for volunteers. I am not exaggerating. And so as time has gone on, some of these questions are being answered, but some of them are still open at the federal level. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and I would imagine there's probably some levels of coverage that would need to be addressed to the minimum levels of coverage, alterations to benefits and things that could impact the health plan as well. And there's certainly, they've delayed a lot of the mandates, but there's probably thousands of pages of rulemaking that still needs to occur to complete the work at the federal level.
And at the end of the day, we'll have thousands of pages of rulemaking, and the only people that really understand it are the people that get to argue about it.
The lawyers.
Yeah.
I didn't say that.
So
There are a lot of new consultants out there.
But I mean, think about it. Think about Social Security. Think about all those federal programs, over time, about how complicated and complex, and all the interpreters and all the customer service people and the IRS, all that. This is just another volume from that same bookshelf.
And not only that, it could also affect these seasonal workers and stuff paychecks, because if they can't work as many hours to avoid giving them health insurance, that will cut their money down. But they also,
Those are the stories we're seeing.
yeah, and if they go, if you decide, okay, we will provide health insurance, but you have to pay such and such an amount of it, then they're going to lose part of their paycheck for health insurance premiums that they may not want because they're 18 or whatever.
Yeah, and as you know, that there are also sanctions in that law for individuals. That if you don't have health insurance, you face a penalty.
So it's the Yavapai Combined Trust, which also includes Yavapai County and, is it the
College.
Yeah, the college.
Or college? So it's across the board on, affecting all of those.
Chino Valley, Yavapai College, and the county.
Right.
And what about,
The trust, which also includes the town of Chino Valley, Yavapai College, and Yavapai County,
Oh.
provides health insurance for full-time employees. So you can imagine right there in that statement, that if this is dealing with part-time employees, you know, there is this potential cost out there like an iceberg.
I think one of the questions that will still being sorted, if you say, let's say 30 hours is the threshold, how does that accumulate? When do you pass that threshold? If you work 40 hours one week and 5 the next week,
You're
there's
plowing,
a
you're
lot
plowing snow and it's coming down.
and you work extra hours one
and
weekend.
you have to manage it, or you get a fine and you say, well, I guess we can't continue plowing snow, you gotta go home. I mean,
right,
these are the realities.
and how will it affect some of your IGAs?
Specifically.
You know, like for instance, you know, suppose you send, you know, some firefighters out to help other fire departments or whatever. I mean, who pays the costs of that?
Oh, well, that's, yeah, that's a whole other thing, that's in the mutual aid and automatic aid, and we're gonna see quite a bit of scrutiny of that as well, you know.
I mean, couldn't ObamaCare affect some of your intergovernmental agreements?
I don't know, because I think they're all full-time employees. You
Yeah.
know, it's about having and providing health insurance. So if we're, you know, our firemen are full-time employees, benefited employees.